Good morning. My name is Susan Larkakita, and I'd like to welcome you all to our one of the first of our series forums on water issues along the Arkansas. I am pleased to present to you two outstanding speakers, Charles Pratt, Molly Bullock. Okay, Molly's going to go first, but just a little background on her. She's a Tulsa-based writer and editor and the founder of Watershed, an independent investigative journalism series on Substack. She is a managing partner and co-founder of Proof, a professional writing and editing services company supporting literacy programs and the independent investigative journalism. She holds a Master's of Arts from the Missouri School of Journalism, which is one of my backgrounds too, and previously edited the Tulsa Voice. She serves on the Tulsa Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee and Oklahoma Climbers Coalition Board of Directors. So, Molly, welcome.
So I'm Molly Bullock. As Susan said, I'm an investigative journalist, and I began working on this series about the Arkansas River in 2020. Actually, I think Charlie invited my editor, Michael Mason, to a community meeting about the Zink Dam, the new Zink Dam, that at the time had not quite started construction, I think. And Michael asked if I wanted to write a story about the dam, and I knew nothing about dams or anything like that, but I immediately said yes because Michael is great, and whatever he thought sounded like a good idea, I was going to be into. And so he and I first spoke to Charlie that maybe August or September, right around the time construction began on the dam, and I conducted a lot of interviews over the next 6-8 months or so, and started to realize that you really can't have a meaningful understanding of any one thing that's happening on the Arkansas River in this area without taking a much broader view. And so that initial investigation of the dam turned into an investigation that really continues more than 3 years later. And I really see it as this tapestry of issues that most people in the area, if they have an understanding of any of the issues, they can only see one little part of maybe one square of this quilt. And over the course of the past 3.5 years, the whole quilt, or a much bigger part of the quilt, I should say, really came into view for me. And so that is what Watershed is about. That's what this series is about. And I guess I would start by how many people, I feel like a lot of you probably have already been introduced to the series, but by a show of hands, anybody have not read any part of the series yet? Okay. So in that case, I just want to share a little introduction to it. It's from the first article. It really, this actually was something that I experienced last April. So basically at the end of the process of trying to release this series, I attended this water conference at Lake Tenkiller, hosted by an organization called Movement Rights, and an Indigenous activist and just global leader named Casey Camp Hornick led the opening ceremony for the event, and it really presented like the truthiest truth. I guess that's not an original phrase for me. I've heard Glennon Doyle say that actually, but like the truthiest truth of the whole picture that I had observed in my research. So I'll just read a little excerpt just to kind of like, properly introduce the subject. Okay. In the hills above Tinkilla Reservoir, shrouded in forest on a blustery April morning, Casey Camp Horinek addressed a circle of visitors. Camp Horinek stood in a black and red hoodie, red ribbon skirt, and traditional beadwork. Beneath swaying blackjacks and post oaks, she opened Convening of the Four Winds, the second in a series of intertribal water protection forums at rivers across Oklahoma. We say thank you to all of the waters, Camp Horinek said. The waters within us, the waters above us, around us, surrounding us, in every way, coming up through our Mother Earth. A global ambassador for Indigenous sovereignty and environmental stewardship, Camp Horinek has spoken to the United Nations and testified before Congress about restoring just and sustainable relationships with Indigenous people and the planet. We are her and she is us, Camp Horinek said of water. We were born into this earth in that water, within the water of the woman. Travelers streamed into the circle with water they'd carried from shores as far as the Wanganui River, Standing Rock, Treaty 4, and the Rio Grande. Uncapping bottles, jars, and to-go containers, they called each source by name before pouring the waters into one vessel: Spavinot, Sasakwa, Spring Creek, the Arkansas River. As this water is joined back together, I want us all to remember that the water within us is guiding us, Camp Horinek said, and guiding us in this ceremony as well as in this gathering and in this lifetime. But as this water is defiled, she is also talking to you about how she wants you to change things. So I'll just close that introduction with the last thing that I included from Casey. Our human species is to blame for the imbalances of the natural law, Camp Horinek said. So the floods happen, the fires happen, the earthquakes happen, the volcanoes erupt, and all of those things are part of the rebalancing. It has to be considered that the water itself has rights, as it always has. That's the natural law. And that right is to be free to be nurtured and to nurture and to sustain all living things that are dependent on the water. That's all of us. That's everything. So Casey really presented like water and the river and this whole world of information that I've been immersed in. I feel like, well, it's an indigenous worldview, it's an indigenous perspective, and again, I feel like it's like the truest foundation that you can be coming from when you're talking about this stuff, and so that it was important to me to open the series that way. But when we talk about river stewardship, poor river stewardship has been a really strong theme in Tulsa throughout our history, since before statehood, really. And the Zink Dam project, which is, I guess probably all of you know, Zink Dam has just been rebuilt at this really symbolic place in the city. It's really like at the seat of Tulsa's origin story. And what I have found in my research is really not going to be surprising to some people here, but the city has assumed that the city has a legal standing to develop the riverbed. And in addition to the treaties that established the reservations here, there are decades of court decisions that affirm the tribe's rights to the riverbed. And so that's a whole area of research that I have not published yet with Watershed, but is coming like after we get through some of the subjects that we're covering right now, which are like these public safety issues related to flooding. But yeah, so that's kind of where the series is headed. But does anybody have any questions like right now before we go further? It's okay if you don't. I can talk a little bit about the court decisions, or yes.
I have a question. Yeah. So when you talk about the city of Tulsa has assumed the right to the riverbed,
Yeah.
It has been confusing, because if you ask the Army Corps, they send you to Tulsa. If you ask Tulsa, they don't have much to do with it. And so when it comes to jurisdiction, it has been confusing, just as a regular citizen, to figure out who has authority or jurisdiction, whether it is dealing with the pollution, whether it's the city or the county. So the refineries are in the county. And so no one really wants to take responsibility for it, is what I found. So who does have jurisdiction, and where does that jurisdiction end?
So there is this concept about navigable waterways in the U.S. Where, like, just to put it simply, like, I believe below, like, where the McClellan-Kerr navigation system starts, that's considered like a navigable waterway. But I believe I've seen some court decision that suggests that this part of the Arkansas is not considered navigable. And so the reason that's important is because, like, the federal government has this sort of, I don't know if you call it like jurisdiction or what, over navigable waterways, but that doesn't apply here. And so, but the way the permitting process goes, it's the Corps of Engineers. But what's, like, again, it's very clear to me that if Muskogee Nation wanted to assert their rights to the riverbed and water, like in the project area of Zink Dam and Jinx Dam, they would win that fight for sure. Like, I mean, there's precedent for that, way beyond just the treaties, which should stand on their own. But and like, we don't actually need the McGirt decision to see that, because of the legal precedent. So it's a really strange situation, because you've got the city just proceeding as if the riverbed belongs to the city.
And if it's not polluted, as if it's not polluted, that's another question I have. Do we know who has jurisdiction over the pollution or the restoration?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. Yeah, so there are so many layers of, I mean, there's ODEQ. Yeah.
Does anyone else have a question that they might ask?
Is there pollution coming from upstream where they're doing all this?
Okay, so this is a really, I'm glad you asked that question, because at the Public Works meeting on Wednesday, so like City Council will gather for a Public Works meeting I don't know if it's every Wednesday or what, but every few months they will put the Zink Dam on the agenda. And so this happened this past week, and I went to the meeting, it's online on the City Council Facebook page. You can see the video still. But so the city, we're like jumping around a little bit, but hopefully everyone will have some kind of meaningful understanding by the end of this. But okay, so just to contextualize this a little bit, the city of Tulsa has built a dam and a whitewater recreation flume right at gathering place, basically, between the refineries and gathering place, and has advertised in the past that people are going to be able to. So the purpose of a whitewater recreation flume, like whitewater recreation is by definition what you would call primary body contact recreation, which is any kind of recreation where you might ingest the water. And the EPA has water quality standards for primary body contact recreation, and then secondary, which is like wading or fishing, basically. And it's a much lower standard, like 5 times lower for secondary body contact recreation. And so for things like surfing, whitewater kayaking, any whitewater sport is primary body contact. And the city has built this amenity and with the, assumption that the water could be used for that level of recreation. And what I have found in my research is that when the original Zink Dam was constructed, it was built by Jim Inhofe around like 1980, 1981. And at the time, there were warnings from the health department about the water quality. There were like demands basically from like the government that the city not build Zink Dam until the water quality issue was resolved. And there are maybe 2 decades of reports from the city county health department from that time documenting the water quality problem in detail and describing stormwater as a huge contributor to contamination in the river. And stormwater gets worse as urbanization increases. And so, of course, Tulsa has only urbanized more since that time that the health department was writing those reports. And they expressed no hope that the stormwater problem would ever be resolved. It's a major, major contributor of bacteria to the river, and the health department was not ambiguous about it. They're like, this is not going away. And that was, those reports stopped being published, I believe, in 2000 or something. I'm not sure why. I don't know if that was taken away from the health department or someone lost interest, or I don't know what happened. But so those reports paint a very clear picture of that part of the problem, right? And then with water contamination, there are just countless other sources too. There is, the only sources that I've seen the city acknowledge, on Wednesday, the only thing that they mentioned, I think, was wildlife. But actually a city councilor, so the city has finally said that they are going to start testing the Arkansas River through Tulsa, because that stretch has not been tested for a very long time by the city. And just as a little background, we've watched a lot of videos of the planning process for this dam and attended a lot of meetings. And I have never seen a public official in one of those meetings acknowledge the problem of bacteria in the river, which is just, it's so odd because of how big the problem is and how well documented it is. Even though we don't have a ton of data in like the past couple decades, right? But like, it was very clear, the health department was very clear about stormwater, and that's a widely known issue, like around the world, right? In fact, very few cities treat their stormwater. I believe Portland just spent like $1.4 billion or something on this, they call it the Big Pipe Project, and they literally treat their stormwater, which is, a huge undertaking. But like the city of Tulsa doesn't even acknowledge that stormwater is a problem in this context, at least, like in the context of recreating in the Arkansas River, or I haven't, like in those planning meetings at least, I did not see anyone acknowledge it. And so fast forward to this Wednesday, and they present their water quality testing plan, and because eventually, like Charlie and a few other concerned residents had brought this up enough times that, like, I would say the first time I heard any official start even acknowledging that water quality was potentially a problem was in the past like year, maybe.
Yeah.
And this project has been in the works since, early 2000s. Yeah, a long time.
Yeah.
So we've planned this entire project. We've gotten the, taxpayer money for it. We've literally constructed it and then started suggesting that we're going to test the water, but not acknowledging like what we actually already know about the water. Okay, there's the background. Okay, so fast forward to Wednesday, and Councilor Laura Bellis asked, after they'd presented this water quality testing plan, so what do we do if we find like a pattern of regular like contamination? If we find this is a problem? What action will we take? How will we identify the sources of contamination, and how will we resolve it? And the official who was presenting the water quality plan, I actually don't know who he was. He's not somebody I'm familiar with, but I guess works for the city, said that is new territory for us, and that kind of, and I just was, obviously stunned because of all of these reports that I've read from the health department, and just the basic reality of stormwater and the basic reality of water contamination and how many sources of contamination there are. This is not something where, unless there is, an illegal dumping incident that occurs where there's this huge, plume that is, or what, it's like, that's, I would say, more the exception to, in contrast to like a chronic, ongoing water contamination issue, right? That again, will not be resolved unless we treat our stormwater. And if we don't acknowledge that stormwater is a problem, I would say we are a far cry from spending $1 billion also treating the stormwater, right? So it's like we're very far from like getting that, narrative to be in line with reality. But yeah, so this gentleman said, that's new territory for us. I don't remember how else he responded, but he did not acknowledge the stormwater issue or the complexity of bacterial contamination. And that was it. I honestly thought about politely interrupting the meeting and just saying, excuse me, there's all these reports, but maybe next time, next public meeting. Yeah, so what was your original question?
Was there more contamination upstream?
So actually, okay, this is,
So what are you saying, I was being think about the storm water waste.
yeah.
That comes from the air and everything.
Uh-huh.
So, I got a pretty loud voice.
It's for the video.
Oh, I got it, it's got it. Oh, I'm sorry, okay. So, that just was curious to me, but you answered my question, really well, and just seems like, what I didn't quite understand just now, though, was this person from the health, these reports are from the health department?
They were, yes.
And this
Yeah.
guy was from the health department?
He was not.
Okay,
Sorry,
that's
he
the part
was.
That's the part I didn't quite understand.
Yes, no, that's absolutely right. He was, I believe, in sewage and stormwater. And
Okay. So as long as you don't test, you don't know, you don't know what's, if you don't test, you don't know,
Well,
it's not, what you don't do is not gonna hurt you, I guess.
And that's
is
what
yeah.
like project managers will tell you is that, well, we don't have data, so you can't tell me it's not safe. And it's like, well, the weight of evidence suggests that here's what we're gonna find. Yeah, Fred.
Molly, I hope this helps, but what happened was in the early 90s, the responsibility for wastewater from municipal sources rested with the health department. And that responsibility was taken away when ODEQ was created. So within a year, the health department quit sampling the river. And nobody picked up the ball, okay?
I think they kept sampling it up through like 2000, I think, is what I think the reports that I saw, yeah.
So ODEQ even today says it's not their responsibility to sample the water in the river. Right.
Who's responsible?
And nobody did it all this time. And the city actually deliberately avoided sampling the river. They had a permit for the stormwater system. But the stormwater permit did not say you have to sample the river. It just said you have to look after the sources of bacteria that are introduced to the river from the stormwater system.
Whose responsibility will it be when one of our kids gets sick? Whose responsibility will it be? I mean, it's not a risk I'm willing to take.
Go ahead.
Okay, when something happens out in the river, and it will, we've killed, 6 or 8 kayakers out there and fishermen in years gone by in that river. And that was a fixed weir dam. So anyhow, we have the same safety hazards, by the way, with the new dam that we have had with the old dam, and in some cases are worse. But if somebody gets injured out there, the city will get sued because they built the dam. They're the ones that are certifying the water, okay? And so the city will have the responsibility legally to pick up the ball, because as Fred said, ODEQ has basically, through some of the emails we have seen back to us, if the city of Tulsa wants people to get in that water and accidentally ingest some, ODEQ has said that is the city and county's responsibility and not ODEQ, because they don't have a monthly, daily sampling period. And like Fred, people have said, we haven't tested that section of the river in a long, long time officially to get it rated for that type of, use and utilization. But nevertheless, as Molly said, we proceeded to build a dam based on data that they had from 2006 on that said the water was unsafe. And as she said, everybody said it'll never get there. Yet, before they initiated construction of the dam, which they will now be responsible for legally, especially in that kayak flume. They've created a public nuisance, as we see it, from a legal liability standpoint. But the onus won't go to ODEQ because they've already in writing said, that ball is in your court, city. Does that answer that question? So even though they would not have had any responsibility, they have created a responsibility by building the dam and inviting people to the river. I'm an ex-employee of the Corps of Engineers, okay? So I wear two hats with the Corps of Engineers. One, when I was with Tulsa District, who is the district that has jurisdiction over this whole permitting process and everything, I was essentially a design engineer for the last two lakes that were built, Arcadia and Skiatook lakes. And I've done a myriad of consulting at just basically for the Corps of Engineers at all of their facilities. So I've done work essentially at every lake in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, and all the way to the Mississippi River as far as the lock systems are concerned. But so when it comes to permitting, and I think Kelsey raised that question early on, how does this process, who has responsibility with this process, so to speak? And what I want to let you know is the Corps of Engineers is just a funnel for input from other agencies, because they have only one responsibility out in that river, okay? Flood control. If there's contamination, it gets past the EPA and ODEQ. If it's safety, they're out of the picture. If someone wants to get in the river and kill themselves, they have no responsibility there. So as part of this permitting process, they go out to all of these entities, ODEQ, EPA doesn't, they really kind of pass the ball to our Oklahoma group for that input. They go out to Fish and Wildlife to get their input, which has been ignored to a great deal in these projects, as far as the wildlife concerns are. And then they go to other entities as required, like they have to have archaeological studies to make sure there's not some, Native American site that was out there in the river. And so all of those investigations have to be done as part of the permitting process. And most of those were done actually back when they built the first dam, okay? And the old dam had the same requirements in its permitting process as the new dam. And one was that it not impair water quality, okay? And so even with the old Zink dam, they found out that the water quality was going to be more impaired with the old Zink dam, according to the Corps of Engineers reports. But nevertheless, it wasn't severe enough, and they didn't look at hydrocarbons coming from the refinery, even though they tested for them and they knew it was going to be worse. They let the process proceed because there was no other agency that had responsibility that stepped up to the plate and said no. Okay? In other words, Fish and Wildlife could not stop the dam, even though there's federal law that says they must give equal consideration to wildlife in any decision making to dam up a river. Equal. So if somebody wants to have it for recreation, the wildlife should have equal say-so in it. But the Fish and Wildlife guys, as I have found out, unless something's on the endangered species, they cannot say no. All right? We have always had water quality data, ongoing data. In fact, some of it was presented to the committee on Wednesday. I have a chart of it up there on that bulletin board that you can look at, and some of it's fairly current. And somebody was doing some testing. They have always done spot testing throughout the years, but it hasn't been what you can say a consolidated ongoing effort, all right? But I thought it was quite interesting because I was involved in this since 2014, that in one of the technical committee meetings that Bynum chaired, finally, one of the counselors, Anna America, bless her heart, finally just asked a point-blank question. Is that water safe to get in? And she was new on the council. And the answer that came from INCOG, their representative, was, I get in the water all the time. Now, did he say, we have data? No. And he also said, now this is in 2015, he says, we are going to go to the state, ODEQ, and show them we have plans to go to the state and get them to re-rate that stretch of water with this missing data to make it primary body contact safe. Now, magically, after that time is when ODEQ withdrew the rating of that stretch of river from secondary body contact only. In other words, you could only wade in it. It disappeared. I think it's quite interesting that somehow or other, INCOG either went to ODEQ and said, we're going to provide you the data, and so ODEQ said, fine, we'll just pull the rating out. So right now we have no official data that shows it's swimmable. But magically, somebody, and I don't know who it is, produced the data that showed up in this Wednesday meeting at the Public Works Committee. And if you look at it, I've got a mark on there that shows you when all the summer months. There are people going to be recreating in that flume in January and December and February. I think not, because the water temperature is like 40 degrees, okay? So obviously the recreational months are what? Late spring, May, June, July, August, September. If you look at that data, you will see from their data that they have right now as a city that was presented to them, the fact that in the summer months, it is not, it's above the legal limit for recreation. So it will always be, what? Wading only. And as Molly pointed out, kayaking, canoeing, those types of events, especially sanctioned events that they think are going to be money makers, won't ever happen. Because you have to have primary body contact standards met before the National Canoeing Association will ever sanction an event in the flume or any canoe races, on and so forth. The lake isn't deep enough or straight enough to have any rowing events out there. So everything that was told to us as citizens financially that this was going to be a big moneymaker, you might as well throw it in the toilet, because the economic study is flawed in the fact that you have to have swimmable water. Because the major moneymakers were triathlons.
And Charlie, I actually spoke with the OU economist who was part of the team that authored the economic impact study that the city released, like kind of right before the public vote on this in 2016. And he said that, so the city had provided him with, or had provided their team with this list of like water recreation type events to take into consideration for the economic impact of these projects. And I asked him about the water quality problem, and he said that that had never come up in their discussions. And he said that if he had known about water quality as a limiting factor, then that would have had a significant negative impact on the findings. Yeah, and so I wouldn't say that he retracted the study officially, but he basically just said, yeah, we didn't have that information that we needed. And so,
If
yeah.
you read the actual study in the first section of it, it specifically says that the Tulsa Chamber, who funded this study, by the way, went to them, like Molly says, we want you to assume that you can hold triathlons in that, rowing events, boat parades, deep draft boats, like they have in Nashville and where they have a big river. This is what you're going to assume. Tell us what kind of money we could make out of that. And if you read down through that report, the biggest money maker was having like 6 to 8 triathlons a year out there in that river.
And
So if you take all that out, all you're left with is the Great Raft Race. That's all you're left with. So all of that hype they put out there of it's going to make us $122 million annually, okay? That's better income than they could ever get out of moving all of General Motors here or anything else. In other words, it's out there in orbit. It was going to create, now that's annually. So you're building a dam for $45,000 and you're going to get $122 million out of it annually. It would pay for itself in 6 months. Now, that's the economics that sold us on this, all right? So I need to get back to water quality somehow or other, or some of the other
I feel
questions
like
that came
we're still
up.
on water quality.
Are we?
It's
Okay. So,
But I just wanted to add really quick. So Oklahoma City, they impounded the North Canadian River,
it's
or
Canadian,
no?
but they
It's,
call it the Oklahoma.
okay, yeah, they renamed it the
Short
Oklahoma
stretch, yeah.
River, and held a triathlon there in, I want to say it was 2013, but I'm like, there's, okay, so they held a triathlon there at some point, despite water quality testing showing bacteria levels that were too high, and at least 43 people got sick. And
So they don't do it anymore.
yes, Nancy.
I was wondering about the dam here, Jenks, posing a lake, will people be boating in the lake? And also, what's the impact of, the Tulsa wastewater plant upriver? Because that area's gotta be impaired and it's, it's flowing in this direction. So will the,
Oh, the Tulsa, well.
is it potentially more polluted here because of the wastewater plant, and what kind of body contact are they talking about here?
Well, the Tulsa wastewater plant is actually south of the Zink Dam, but
Well, I'm
it'll
talking
impact,
about in
it'll
Jenks,
impact the
the
South
Jenks
Tulsa.
The Jenks Dam,
Say again?
The new
the
proposal.
new proposed Jenks Dam, how will that affect?
Oh, it'll be the same as the old one. I mean, it's, any pollutant that was in the old one is gonna be in the new one too, only probably it'll be if, the way they're planning, okay, let's talk about the operation of the new dam, or even the South Tulsa Dam a little bit. Originally, those dams, as proposed, those of you that went to the public meetings show how the gates go up and down, and little fishies can go by and all that kind of stuff. So these gates were supposed to be operated such that if the water flow is enough they want to flush these things out from time to time, maybe even daily, they could, and still have water there for people to look at and recreate in. In other words, when Keystone makes a release, there's enough water there to fill that lake up in 4 hours. So they could, on a daily basis, keep flushing this out if they wanted to. But right now, Paul Zachary and City Engineering has written the ops plan so that they're going to impound water 24/7, okay? That's the way the operations plan is. So they're going to make it actually, in a way, worse than the old dam, because most of the time the gates on the old dam didn't work and they had to leave them down. So it was kind of naturally flushing itself out in a way and just building up sand. So the way I look at it is the way the city wants to operate it, so that we have a perpetual lake out there that no fish can get by, it's going to actually be worse. That's what I would predict. Now, the other thing you're going to hear on water quality, and I want to get this cliche that you will keep hearing possibly from some of the city guys. Dilution is the solution. Helen's smiling, but okay. They claim that with this whole series of lakes, because they can flush it out and keep water moving, so like Sand Springs was supposed to have a dam that would impound water that was actually cleaner than anything in Zink Lake, a little bit. So that water was going to be moving a constant flow overnight down the river to kind of help flush out some of this bad stuff. Well, I basically took some of the data from some of the previous water quality data and ran a correlation against river flow versus bacteria. And there was no correlation. I looked at it on a daily basis when they did the sample. What was the river flow immediately before that? There was no correlation. I looked at it 3 days ahead of 2 days, 3 days. Again, the correlation statistically is almost zero. So higher river flow, well, in fact, on one of the days, the river flow was up in the 12,000 CFS, 2 generators running at Keystone. And yet the bacterial counts, because it was in the summertime, were up in they were almost 40 times the legal limit. Now why, I don't know. Fred kind of knows some of that old data came from the Berry Hill. You want to talk to him about Berry Hill just a little bit, Fred?
Well, Berry Hill Creek is
Berry Hill Creek is one of the sources of bacteria that enter the river. And Berry Hill is not sewered. So Berry Hill is basically operates with septic tanks. Some of they're like 70 years old. And the Berry Hill school system is now going to be pumped to Sand Springs, but it was also a broken down sewage treatment plant. So Berry Hill Creek is a source. Keystone, water from Keystone is usually clean because bacteria die in a lake. They get eaten by other creatures, and so the fecal bacteria die off in a lake. And you get the high numbers because fresh bacteria are introduced to the river from the storm sewer system, which is some illegal connections, all of the animals, dogs, cats, malfunctioning lift stations that go into the stormwater system, et cetera. All of the contributors to the river from the city stormwater system have been known, consistent with the monitoring that the city's already done, that they all exceed the standards for primary body contact recreation. So how is it that the river is going to somehow be clean? They didn't want to know they didn't want the numbers, so they didn't measure the river.
Correct. And that's what I observed from 2014 on in all the technical committee meetings, is that there was one meeting on water quality, just one, early on, until later on in 2015 when Anna America finally said, is that water safe to get in? There was one meeting early on in which they presented 2006 data as like, we already have all the data we need. This is what the council was told. We already have all the data we need. And the gentleman put out about 3 different reports, all right? If you read those reports, he didn't say the reports show that the water is safe to get into. He just said, here we have all the data we need to proceed. Now, the committee never asked the question during that meeting, what does it show? No one asked.
He even, and this is Galen Pence, who's the project manager, who actually kind of oversaw the creation of the Arkansas River Corridor Plan, which is resulting in these dams being built. And then he, after the county adopted the plan, he left INCOG and began working for the project manager overseeing this development. And in this meeting that Charlie's describing, he, if I'm recalling correctly, he makes this shape with his hands, and he's like, it's a big report. You know, he doesn't have the report in front of him, but he's like, yeah, we've got a big report. We've done a lot of research about this. And again, it doesn't appear, I mean, there's been no indication that anyone in the room read the report since that time.
No one from the city read. There's a myriad of technical reports by CH2M Hill, who was the engineering contractor on this job, they have technical reports on fish and wildlife, what it's going to take to make them happy. Water quality, recognizing that all the data shows that you can't recreate in it. The reports that Mr. Pink referred to, if you read the report, this gold standard report, what it says is the primary purpose of the report was to determine whether or not impounding water in the lake would adversely affect dissolved oxygen for the fish. But as part of that, they also did water quality testing. And if you go down to the bacterial tests, the report specifically says it's not safe to swim in. So again, the questions were never asked by the committee, and I could speculate on why, but they want to build a dam. They really wanted to build a dam. And Molly, in her latest article, I think has a real jewel of some information you need into what was the pool record, the seven numbers.
Yeah.
Read it. That'll tell you why we are building a low water dam. And it is not because Tulsans wanted it, because as Kelly Bostian presented in his article in the People magazine, we voters turned it down 2 or 3 times in the past, even the old dam. And the only way they were able to get it through this time was to log roll it into the economic development package. You know, when we had police and fire, we had 3 packages we voted on in 2016. So that's how it got produced. They knew they didn't have data to support recreation, and they know that when they test it, it's going to show exactly what the data today shows, that it won't meet it, but they're going to go ahead and test and tell you, they'll give you numbers and let you decide whether you want to get in the river. So I'm going to stop there.
Well, I have a request for a question. Can you relate what's happened, what we've always seen happening in the low water dam, which, as to my understanding, the new low water dam is pretty much the same as the old low water dam. The mechanism for lowering the dam so the water can flow through. Is that correct?
Okay, so the old dam originally was supposed to have, I think we only wound up with 2 gates in it, but I think we have heard that originally it was going to have 7 gates in it. And so it had basically the same capability. It had metal gates that just were hydraulically operated that would lower them. But I suspect because of budgetary conditions, when Mr. Inhofe raised some money to get it built, they cut some of those out, so we were left with 2. So those had the same constraints. There were supposed to be fish passages designed into the dam, and they were supposed to not create an adverse flooding condition, make it worse. Same constraints. So there are similarities there, and the new South Tulsa Dam, which I've got photos of, you can see what they're planning for that, essentially will be the same type of design to a certain.
So the South Tulsa Dam is the Jinx Dam, what
The
some
Jinx
of us
Dam,
call the
right.
Jinx Dam. Yeah, do you foresee what's happening up in the Zink area? How is that going to relate to what's going to happen in Jinx that you see?
Okay, well, the Jinx situation will be even worse. Although, I say that. Well, yes, it will, because it's going to be picking up more creek discharge and stormwater discharge down below Zink Dam. So if they impound water, which they don't plan to impound water to the same degree as zinc if they stick with their operations plan, but I don't trust that. So if they impound water exactly the same way they're going to plan to do it in Zink Lake, it should be worse, because as you go downstream, it gets worse and worse and worse because of more sources. So it's only logical that it would be worse.
They haven't started their construction yet, though, have they?
No, they haven't. And actually, that whole dam project was never going to be built until they got another party involved. You know, we had the city of Tulsa, Jinx, that community. There had to be a third partner because we didn't have enough money to do it. Okay, right. And that's where they went to the Creek Nation as with the casino, blah, blah, blah. And it was written into the ordinance, unless they had another partner, it would never be built. Well, it's taken them this long to get another partner. And evidently the tribe finally decided to pony up the missing money. They know, if you look at the layout of the lake, you'll find out that when they back up water, the casino sees no benefit. They'll still have a sandbar out in front of the casino. So they didn't see any benefit coming from that directly. But evidently they swung a deal with the city and county to create some sort of, as I understand it, a special tax district along that stretch of the river for restaurants, concessionaires, whatever is going to take place in there. I have not seen the agreement, so I really can't tell you the details, but somehow or other the tribe was convinced that they could get some benefit out of this. So they are now a partner in that development of that dam.
My understanding, though, was that it was a very divided vote.
Very, very.
And this happened basically 1 year ago, a little over a year ago. And I mean, you never know what will happen in the future. Like I said, like if the tribe did decide to assert their rights to the riverbed and water, or, you know, have enough information about how everything has happened to determine that they maybe don't want to be involved, or yeah, I mean, who knows what could happen? Yeah, because it hasn't been built, and
It's not done, so it's not too late to oppose it, right? Because if it was a bad idea in the first place, maybe.
Well, it's not. Well, if they have the money, and supposedly they do now, the permit has already been processed through the Corps of Engineers, so they have the permit. In fact, unlike the Zink Dam, where they failed to put an operations plan together until the 11th hour, they already have the operations plan for the dam. So they've checked off all the boxes as far as the permitting goes, and they supposedly have the money. There's nothing now to stop them from proceeding on the design.
Not even common sense.
so
No, it's too late. We've already voted in the money. Okay?
yeah, just the city's behavior through this process has been pretty fascinating. So I started releasing this series in August, and was very forthcoming with the mayor and other officials, before I release a series in terms of the questions I asked. And it was pretty clear, like, what was happening with the series. But so January 31st, just a couple days ago, Mayor Bynum posted on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, this little post. This year, Tulsans will realize a vision our community has been talking about and hoping for since the 1960s, exclamation point. The new lake is going to transform the way we interact with our defining natural feature, the Arkansas River. The expertise and devotion of so many brought us to this point. I am grateful for all the professionals who are working hard on the final details before the opening this summer, exclamation point. Exclamation point. So, yeah, there's like no, it's just, it keeps, yeah, it's just interesting to me that like it's that hasn't changed.
Yeah, it's like denial. I mean, I don't know. Go ahead.
Yes. Yes.
I'm just wondering, because when you said when they do this testing, obviously there's going to be some contamination, and they'll say, go ahead and get in if you want to. Will there be something that says recreate at your own risk? And if so, does that resolve the city of any legal responsibility?
They haven't figured out exactly how they will. They know they're going to post it on the web, okay? But here's the problem they're going to have. Even if they did daily testing out there in the river, you can see from the daily test data from the ancient days that it changes every day. Not only that, on one day you might see oil sheens out there in the river, and the next day you won't. So if things are changing on a daily basis, and they post it on the web, it doesn't mean that you can go out there tomorrow and it'll be safe. Unless they show on a long-term basis that it never gets above the standard.
It takes 36 hours to get the results back from testing for fecal coliform.
Yeah, so how will they ever, I mean, rationally, ever be able to give you a green light to go out there and recreate when the test data they're giving you is old data? You know, it's not, I don't know, the longer you get involved in this, it's just, you just go, am I in the twilight zone here at times? Because there's no, and you really don't want to get involved in this too deeply because it's so irrational. It'll drive you nuts, folks, on certain days. But go ahead, Fred.
Who is Blake Ewing is G.T. Bynum's head of staff, and at the close of the Public Works Committee meeting last Wednesday, he basically explained we're going to be entirely transparent. We're going to publish all this data. It's even going to be available on your cell phone. You'll be able to go down to the river and read it on a QR code to make a connection, and we're going to trust the citizens to make their own decisions about whether it's safe to get in the water. Well, I don't think that's going to work, because I think on Labor Day, people are going to show up with their children and their inner tubes. And anybody that puts their children in the water is essentially committing child abuse.
I don't think they'll be there with their inner tubes, but.
Okay. Yeah, we're getting close to time, so, a couple more questions, but I do like to know as well, putting this, you mentioned in your article, and, things that, we need to be telling the public about, when you start seeing Israel, what are you guys doing? It's kind of like, very young and so they're really coming like the Lord. So, and we'll discuss this in the future is like the habitat in the area of the question and the method up and the flow. So I know that's coming up in the additional series, but anyway, so I think you have a question?
What type of bacteria specifically or other contaminants are there, and what are the known effects, short-term and long-term, for human health, and particularly thinking about children and like fetal embryonic development and things that could come up like decades later, that kind of thing, short-term or long-term?
Well, you can answer the fecal. Go ahead with the bacteria, Fred.
Is that the question was? The question was what type of bacteria? Okay, I'm afraid this is complicated, but what we have is a system that's existed for 75 or 100 years, where we have indicators of bacteria. And so we look for bacteria that are present in the intestines of warm-blooded animals. And that is, the best one to use for freshwater is E. coli. So basically you measure E. coli, and then if the levels are high enough, it infers that there's stuff in there that you don't want to be exposed to. So it's not, E. coli is actually, you've got E. coli, I've got E. coli. That's not what's bad. What's bad are the things that you didn't measure that are too expensive and take too much time to measure. So we measure them by looking for indicators, and the indicators are the fecal coliforms.
Yeah. Now, as far as the other pollutants go, I mean, we know hydrocarbons and all kinds of petrochemical products are seeping in their subsurface, some of which they test for, some of it they don't, okay? It's the ones that they don't that are probably our biggest concerns, but I don't think anyone in their right mind is ever going to go out there and drink on a daily basis the water out of the Arkansas River. So it's not something where you take a sip and you're going to be glowing in the dark, all right? But yeah, again, it's if you are an angler and you eat fish out of that river, you're going to be picking up heavy metals and all kinds of stuff. So the city health department actually used to have signs down there, don't eat the fish. But there are anglers out there day in and day out. Some of them are just sport fishermen only, but others are taking them home to consume, okay? But so there are long-term chemicals that can cause hazards. There are airborne pollutants over there closer to the refinery on the West Bank that you don't want to really be around on a continuing basis. But they have never tested for all of the chemicals that they need to test for. And in the last meeting where they addressed the water testing, it's my understanding they just said we're going to test for hydrocarbons. We have no idea what that spectrum is going to be because, as Fred mentioned, it costs money to look for 200 different chemicals. You're testing for different chemicals, and each test takes money. So we have no idea what they're going to spend money on to test for other than the E. coli and the bacteria from the petrochemical side. But when you can see an oil sheen out there, I don't think you want to get in the water. We've got another question.
I just to add to that, I think if I'm remembering correctly, it said that the hydrocarbon tests is it 2 weeks to come back? Is that what it said on the slideshow? So it's like,
all of those presentation materials are available. I don't know.
Tulsa City Council Facebook page, you can see the meeting and watch the slideshow because it's on the.
And the city said that they were actually going to look for total petroleum hydrocarbons is a very good sign. I'm sure they're going to find something because petroleum hydrocarbons flow into the river every day because the refineries have a legacy of spills and deliberate burials on their property when it's carried by the groundwater into the river.
Thank you, Fred. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So my question is a little broad, and it's okay if we want to like table it, but you mentioned you used to work or you work ancillarily with the Army Corps of Engineers. And for example, after Hurricane Katrina, we all know what happened to the residential areas that were flooded for a very long time, and the amount of heavy metals and bacteria and just filth in the water that was deposited in people's yards and homes. So I'm wondering, does the EPA or the Army Corps of Engineers have any remediation allowances that we could draw upon? Does that make sense? Like, could we protect our river by pointing out that our levees are weak, we could be the next Katrina? How can we avoid it? You know, ways that would just help maybe mitigate in the event of flooding or just regular usage from things entering our water. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's all part of the.
Okay, yeah, this is
She
like,
has some of that information on her levy.
so the first part of this series, the part that's out now, is all about flooding. It like introduces the dam, but in the context of this other thing that is happening on the river, which is we have hundreds of acres of refining and chemical hazards sitting in the floodplain behind our failing levees. We conducted a levee study that was expedited after the 2019 flood, which, as you will read in, I believe, is it Article 6 that just came out yesterday, or no, 7, what Charlie was just talking about. That 2019 was effectively one rainfall away from releases from Keystone Dam that likely, could have definitely breached the levee system, possibly gone farther than that. And and yet, we expedited this levee study. And if you read the levee study, because we did get funding to conduct the repairs that the Corps determined were, the way to move forward. If you read the levee study, it's, so most people don't even know where our levees are. There are levees A and B are, levee B is basically where New Block Park is, levee B begins and then goes all the way to Big Heart Creek. Levee A goes around part of Sand Springs, including a Superfund site that was a petrochemical complex where there was literally acid sludge dumped in the river, and that has anyway, it's a big problem. But and then levee C goes around, it's on the other side of the river around our 2 refineries that are still operating after more than 100 years. And again, are known to be contaminated, the groundwater, the soil, with all of these, hazardous materials. And so what the Corps decided about the levees in this levee study is that we are not going to raise the height of levees A and B, again, on the Tulsa Sand Springs side of the river. We're not going to raise the height of them beyond their 80-year-old design height, and we're not going to repair levee C at all, which does not sound real, but yeah, but it is real. And a lot of people still don't know that. I would love to pull up Mayor Bynum's Facebook post announcing the funding for the levee repairs, because it's just you just don't get that vibe from what he said about what we're doing with the levees. He said, I believe something like, these repairs ensure that the levee system will be fully functional for generations to come. And the reality is just so far from that it's hard to even. And I actually asked Mayor Bynum this spring. I got to speak with him after a public event, and this is in the second article in the series. But I was like, are you aware that we're not raising the height of levees A and B? and we're not repairing levee C. And he just kind of said like, no, or I don't know. And I was like, you don't know. And he said, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. And so, I mean, so that's like where we're at, in short. And yes, like with Hurricane Harvey, I mean, they had so much contamination that occurred that will like never be made whole. Like you can never make it whole again. And there's no, it's this nebulous thing that like, you know, maybe you get sick, but you can never prove that that's, you know, where it came from, or like you don't know where all of this stuff was released because it's like in a flood that, you know, goes all over the floodplain and then downstream and then to the, you know, the Gulf, and then, you know, so it's like, it's this,
Levees are not the answer to anything. If the Corps of Engineers could get rid of every levee in the nation, they would be perfectly happy, because you can never build them high enough.
The place we're sitting in is protected by a levee.
Yes.
This levee, the Jinx levee, is in better condition than the Tulsa levees, than District 12.
In '86, it almost went over the top.
It is protected by a levee. Anybody that lives in a neighborhood that's protected by a levee, and anybody that lives in a neighborhood that's within the 500-year floodplain should be really serious about understanding their situation.
Right. And as far as cleanup goes, the Corps doesn't go get money for cleanup. Now they will, as an engineering group, they will work with engineers. Once a site has been inundated and polluted through EPA, they will get money through channels to come in and remediate. But that could be horrendous, and you're talking mega bucks, bazillion bucks, and you're talking about a process that takes to get the money. First, it has to be declared a restoration, RCRA site, as we call it. And then they got to go get money and figure out how they're going to clean it up. And it takes a decade and a half to get anything done. So, for instance, if this area got flooded, and it's going to have pollutants too. We have gasoline stations that are going to pollute the area, right? The areas that Molly was talking about in the Sand Springs area and below that, there's industrial sites. All that gunk is going to go into the river, and they'll declare it a restoration site. But the levees, even on the May 2019 flood, which wasn't as high as the '86 flood by about a foot, we almost lost the levee over at New Block Park. In '86, we did breach the levee in Sand Springs. So keep in mind that in '86, which is the highest one we've seen so far, that was 1/3 of the capacity release-wise from Keystone Lake. 1/3. They only had 30% of the gates open, and we still couldn't handle it. So if they ever had to open the gates at Keystone as it stands today, you could kiss the refinery goodbye. You could kiss all of these levees goodbye. They're gone.
There are maps of like the inundation zone for Keystone Dam 2 in Article 6.
So levees are not the answer. Making them taller is not the answer. All you do is push the problem somewhere else.
Also, just really quick, David Williams, the chief hydrologist with the Corps, just pointed out that like the levees were never designed to protect against all the risks posed by Keystone Dam, because the levees were built years before Keystone Dam was ever built. And so the magnitude of flooding that we're talking about with Keystone Dam 15 miles upstream it's just a completely different conversation than what the levees were built 80 years ago to protect.
And it's the same way with a dam. Keystone Dam can never guarantee you're not going to get flooded downstream. All it does is buy you time. Okay, so if the inflow coming into the reservoir is greater than you can release out of the dam, all it does is buy you time to where they say evacuate. That's what a dam does, is it buys you time during those monster events, okay? So it's just like levees. They'll handle these little floods, yeah.
During the flood of 1986, I did work with the fire, getting the fence to verify. It flooded, the government, that retired said you were getting yards of levees, and it did flood the whole. That was a published, and I knew that was going to.
And when that refinery even gets minor flooding, the pollutants that are in the ground, guess what happens to those? They flow towards the levee, and then they're pumped into the river. Exactly. With pumps that are designed to make sure the levee doesn't fail from the interior water coming in. So flooding is another whole issue, really.
Whole session, but we'll go ahead and wrap up.